Hello everyone, and thank you for joining Accessible Travel, making your travel program inclusive by making the uncomfortable comfortable. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. All attendees will be muted at all times. Please type any questions into the Q&A box. You are able to type these at any time, and the questions will be monitored and answered as time permits at the end of the presentation. If you do have any technical issues, please close out of the webinar and re-enter the platform. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants afterwards. And as an introduction for today's topic, we will be starting with a short video that was filmed last year. Please enjoy the video and welcome to the presentation.
Traveling. Nothing gets me fired up like that sense of adventure, not knowing who you're going to meet or what any day is going to bring. But even if you travel as much as I do, you can sometimes forget just how challenging it can be. Here you see Jenny from American Airlines. She did a wonderful job helping me board the plane, taking care of my crutches, my bag. And she also talked to the gate agent and the gentleman down who stowed the wheelchair, my wheelchair, to make sure that it was taken care of properly. The biggest sense of anxiety I have is making sure that that chair is going to be there when I disembark. Sliding into business class, boy, that's quite a relief. For a lot of people, traveling business class is a luxury. For me, as somebody with the physical pain that I'm in every day, it is an absolute necessity that I stretch out my lower back, my hamstrings, my hip flexors, and my hips so that I make sure that I'm at my absolute best when I hit the stage in Paris or wherever I happen to be speaking that day. Now, here we are, we're landing in Paris. The staff does a wonderful job making sure that I have what I need. The flight attendant hands me my crutches. I want to give you a sense of just how narrow those aisleways are. Ooh. Even though I've been in a chair for my entire life, every time I see myself walking on crutches, I have to admit I cringe. I like to think I'm a little bit more fluid than that. The attendant there put the cushion on the chair just perfectly. You may be wondering, is this taxi truly accessible? While it didn't have a ramp, it met my needs swimmingly because I was able to ride shotgun and had plenty of room in the back for my chair, and I didn't have to take the wheels off. I've got a rigid frame chair, so taking the wheels off is doable, but it's kind of a last resort. Here we are arriving at the hotel inside. Through the magic of editing, I'm already in my chair, and there is nothing better after a long flight than a comfortable bed, and I can assure you folks that the bed at the hotel inside was accessible, was comfortable, and just a lovely hotel. Until next time, keep rolling. Travel.
Hey, hello and welcome. My name is Liz Pond and I'm a regional sales director at American Airlines. I am so excited to share with you today an amazing group of people that I've had the privilege of working with on a GLP or global leadership project that we think is incredibly important and relevant today. Now our team consists of George Kalka. We can move to the next slide. Vice President of Fox World Travel. Our fearless leader, Jeff Cherry, Global Account Executive with Marriott International. The amazing Angela Paulus, who runs the Global Travel Program at Pitney Bowes. Our good friend Mark Stratford, formerly American Airlines. And also Mr. Hector Ruiz, a fabulous colleague and General Manager at Delta Airlines. Now, there are many places where airlines, hotels, and transportation companies compete. Accessibility is not one of them. Caring for travelers on life's journey is a place where we all come together and share best practice and do better. Now today is about we're going to talk about some important things about creating a more accommodating and inclusive travel journey. Are we pausing to think through the unique needs of our travelers? In fact, what does that really mean? Let's look with a new lens at caring for travelers from pre-trip planning through transportation, the airport, hotel, and return, the entire journey. We're going to look at three things to kind of guide us on our journey today. First, awareness. This may be the very first time that accessibility has come into focus for you. That's okay, you're not alone. Communication. Are we asking good questions? As an industry, as suppliers and travel managers, are we working together to initiate change in this space? Are we speaking up for those who are looking to us for guidance? The third category, education. What can I say? What am I allowed to ask? We might have the very best of intentions, but we freeze because this is a really difficult subject to tackle. And because people are different and there's no one right way. How do we make the uncomfortable comfortable? That's what today's about. What resources exist to help connect the dots for those that are in need of our assistance or expertise? Now, I'd like to pause for a second. It's possible many of you are multitasking and only half listening. Don't worry, I'm not offended. You're thinking this doesn't really apply to me because maybe I have no one in my company that has a wheelchair, or potentially somebody else handles accessibility. Well, I challenge you to think differently and give us your full attention for the next 30 minutes and then decide how relevant this is to you. Now, I'd love to tell you a story. This here is a picture of my healthy 14-year-old daughter who is stronger and taller than me. Isabella has traveled her entire life and should be able to glide through airports with ease, right? I mean, she's an airline brat. Now, this next picture is an X-ray of her ankle with 8 screws and a plate from July 1st this year. Guys, we were on a family trip to Denver. Longboarding did not go well, and we needed to get from the emergency room in Loveland, Colorado, back to Phoenix Children's Hospital for surgery. We had to navigate transportation to the airport where every bump caused excruciating pain. We experienced firsthand airport wheelchairs and the aisle chair used for folks with severely reduced mobility, all the time trying to keep her dignity intact, her adolescent dignity intact. Guys, she didn't want any help, but she needed it. Hey, at least we got to board first. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever had an employee who got injured on a business trip or incentive trip? How are you going to take care of them? What plan do you have in place to protect their dignity? Reduced mobility can happen to anyone. Now, I've got one more story for you. This next one is a picture of my friend Brett, who you saw in the video earlier today, and his beautiful wife, Claudia. Let me ask you another question. Based on what you can see and already know about Brett, who would you guess is going to have an easier time navigating the airport or a hotel from a mobility perspective? Brett or Claudia? Brett or Claudia? Well, to properly care for people, we may need to challenge our assumptions and ask more questions. It's possible that Claudia was diagnosed with COVID-19 and for some time suffered from reduced lung capacity. Now, if that's the case, she most likely had a hard time walking across the living room, never mind a large hotel or convention center or airport. How do we take care of Claudia? Is it possible that anyone in your organization had COVID-19? It's probably likely. Hey, is this topic relevant yet? All right, I have a final story, so bear with me. This next picture is a picture of my 6'5", 35-year-old neighbor, Jeff. Well, kinda. He had cancer, and he's immunocompromised. He's doing okay. He works for a Fortune 500 company. How is that company going to take care of him in this crazy world today? Is that company's travel program prepared to handle my neighbor? I mean, he looks okay, right? How do we make resources available to him? Are your eyes open yet? Is the magnitude of caring for people through life's journey coming into focus? Now, this session is about those who self-identify or self-disclose with a visible or invisible need, reduced sight, hearing, a dangerous allergy, maybe even emotional or cognitive concerns. It's also for those who care for them. Guys, we're the ones responsible for caring for them. Travel managers, suppliers. This is also about how we guide those who are more private with their needs. How do we give them the right information and help them help themselves? This session is not about legal compliance or box checking. It's about the human factor. We have plenty of great resources available to you that can point you to the right direction in our toolkit. We'll talk about that later on ADA and everything else. But today is about doing more than the minimum to improve the accessibility journey. The work that we've done is domestic in scope, but global in relevance. Our goal is to take the scary out of accessibility conversations, provide a toolkit, and offer up some companies that do really, really well in this space. Now I have one more special surprise for you today, a true subject matter expert in the field of accessibility, someone who has been Phoenix's 40 under 40 advisor to the mayor of Phoenix on accessibility and inclusion, the one and only Mr. Brett Heising, CEO of Brett Approved and star of the video. Thank you for joining and welcome, Brett.
Hey, thank you, Liz, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure to be spending time with each and every one of you today. And I want to thank you in advance for taking the time to examine life from my perspective. You know, you saw in the video, which incidentally was filmed well before the world was familiar with COVID, You saw in that video just how difficult it is for me to travel, just how challenging it is for me to travel. But I, like many of you, like all of you, in fact, I'm a business traveler. So that means when I travel, I've got work to do. I'm not just going for leisure. I'm not just going for fun. I need to make sure that everything I do puts me in a position to be successful, whether I'm closing a deal or whether I'm speaking on stage. And I love what Liz, was talking about, the human factor. As you know from the video, I've been in a wheelchair my entire life. I'm 45 years old. I just turned 45 this week. And so I'm kind of used to it. I know what to expect. But this is a point I want to drive home, is that disability can find any of us, anytime, anywhere. Just because each of you listening was blessed with a body that works the way it should, that doesn't mean you're always going to have that body. And if something, God forbid, should happen, do you change? Does that change who you are? Does that change what you like? Does that change your job? No, you're still the exact same person you were. You just navigate the world a little differently. You're the exact same person you were. You just navigate the world a little differently. And that's important. I want to emphasize that nobody with a disability, myself included, defines ourselves by that disability. I'm many things. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I'm a 20-year PR and public affairs executive. I'm a husband, brother, uncle, son, way down the list of all of my accomplishments. Oh yeah, I just happen to be in a wheelchair. Now today I'm coming at you from my home office in Phoenix due to COVID, but if we were in person, you'd see my shiny titanium chair and it would be kind of hard to avoid, right? I mean, you can't really miss a shiny $10,000 titanium chair, but that chair does not define me. It's not something I regret per se. That chair allows me to be the best that I can be. It allows me to, as I say, travel freely. But I really want to drive home the fact that I can't do this alone. I've been running my company and spoken all over the world and lectured at colleges and universities. And what I always tell people is what I just said. I cannot do this alone. I need each of you to be an advocate for me within the context of your jobs. A lot of times when we talk about advocacy, people get a little nervous. Well, we've all got a lot on our plates right now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's true. We certainly do. But I want to make sure that it's not overwhelming, right? We can make a difference in the context of our jobs. So whatever your job is, just ask yourself, are you doing everything you can do to help travelers with permanent physical disabilities or reduced mobility? Liz mentioned my beautiful wife, Claudia, and it pains me to tell you that Claudia she did in fact test positive for COVID-19 in early July. So we, in spite of being very, very careful, she did contract the virus. And so we spent the entire month of July in quarantine. And Claudia, who fortunately has been able-bodied her entire life, she said something to me that really struck a chord. She said, I kind of know how you feel right now. And I said, well, what on earth are you talking about? She said, well, I know how much pain you're in every day, how physically demanding it is just to get up and take a shower and get dressed. And she said, I feel that. I feel that pain. I feel that, the isolation that many people with disabilities can feel. I'm fortunate enough to be able to drive, but with hand controls, but a lot of people with disabilities can't. And so the isolation, the loneliness that each of us has felt throughout this COVID endeavor, that's not new to people with disabilities. So each of you in your own way, without knowing it, has experienced a little bit of my life. But it's not good enough to just think to yourself, well, I'm going to care about this for an hour. That's not good enough. I need a commitment from each of you that you're going to care about this well beyond today. Because without you, nothing's going to happen. We have to be the agents of change. We have to say that what we're doing now isn't good enough. And even if it is good enough, let's get better. Nobody ever, ever, ever was disappointed when they pursued excellence. It's difficult, it's challenging, but in terms of accessibility, pursuing excellence is exactly what I expect each of you to do. If not for me, for yourselves. It's a team effort. It truly is a team effort. We're going to dive into some wonderful statistics. It's been great spending time with you, and so now I'm going to turn it over to George Kulka. Take it away, George.
Thanks, Brett. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us. As Brett and Liz both highlighted, everything we talk about today is about our fellow human being and their human right in life's journey. Now, if what we've shared already doesn't have you paying attention to this need, let's dig into some facts. Brett is one of the 61 million Americans, or 1 in every 4, who live with a disability. As Brett shared, these are Americans. They're people first. They're our neighbors. These are our colleagues, our friends, even our family. Now, you would think with a quarter of our population impacted by some type of disability, that we as a society would be doing a better job of supporting our fellow human beings. Let me illustrate this for you. The facts tell us from the CDC that nearly 14% of adults face mobility challenges. Yet the ADA only requires that 3% of hotel rooms are mobile accessible. Now, we're not here picking on hotels today. It's just an example that really puts a spotlight on our industry. The math doesn't necessarily add up. Inaccessible rooms may not always be truly accessible based on the traveler's need. Think about this fact. For a 100-room hotel, the ADA only requires one room to have a roll-in shower. Our friend Brett has a 1 in 100 chance of securing the room that best accommodates him. And as Liz shared earlier, it's not always about the disabilities that you can see. Take a look at the CDC chart again on the right that highlights the percentage of adults and their types of functional disabilities they live with. Second on that list, at nearly 11% of adults, they face a cognition disability, meaning that they have serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. Now, many of us in the travel industry, we've traveled in our lifetime. Think about our own experiences in working through the maze of an airport, the gate changes, remembering the time of your flight connections, not to mention if you have any added confusion when you throw a disruption into the mix. Think about that stress of travel in general. And now consider a traveler with a cognition disability and the increased anxiety or challenges that they have in their travel journey. This impacts those with COVID-19 as well. In fact, the New York Times recently reported that some COVID-19 survivors are coping with long-term cognitive symptoms such as memory loss, confusion, and grasping for everyday words. It's impacting their ability to work and function normally. Ponder that for a moment. There is so much preparedness that corporate travel needs to support these travelers. And now with travel resuming across many organizations, we're about to send these already under-supported travelers out into a COVID pandemic environment where there's new rules, there's new policies, there's new stresses that didn't exist even just a few months ago. And I'll ask the same question Liz did. Is this relevant to you yet? I want to share with you the results of a survey that our GLP team conducted in the fall of last year. We had more than 100 travel buyers respond in providing their own insights to this topic. And the buyers who participated spanned across all industries, all spend categories. In fact, 50% of our respondents had greater than 30 million in annual travel spend, and of course the other half had less. On a macro level, our survey revealed that the ability to address accessibility within corporate travel has to start with awareness of the need and the gaps that we currently have. Gap number one, only one-third of travel managers, or 34%, didn't know if their organization even had travelers with conditions that impact mobility. This speaks directly to awareness about the topic. Gap number two, our next significant finding was the uncertainty around education and uncertainty around knowledge and resources that are even available to support travel managers on this topic. The majority, 6 out of 10 travel managers, don't feel that they're prepared to adequately address this topic within their organization. It takes tools and it takes understanding to build a travel program that's inclusive. Which leads me to gap number three. It's not surprising if travel managers report that they're not equipped to address the needs, that 2/3 or 66% of travel programs just consider themselves average or even low in meeting the needs of these travelers. The bottom line, there are significant gaps, but there is a huge opportunity here for corporate travel. And the good news is, our survey found that 95% of organizations have a travel policy. That means immediate progress can be made by addressing the topic within the policy. Roughly a quarter of our survey respondents shared that they have a program or even some specific policy processes for travelers with unique needs. And this is great. But on the flip side of that, it also highlighted that 3/4 of programs don't even have that minimum. There's a huge opportunity to leverage your existing policy framework and advance the support provided to travelers with both visible and invisible disabilities. And then we're here today, we have to move beyond just having a policy. It simply isn't enough. We have to bring it to life within our organizations. And why is that important? Because to be inclusive, we have to advocate for proactiveness in meeting travelers with disabilities where they are versus putting the responsibility on the traveler to ask or initiate on their own. Let me connect some dots here for you. As I've shared, the data tells us in general that corporate travel is not fully prepared to support travelers with unique needs, despite that they're prevalent in travel programs. Very few corporations are knocking it out of the park when it comes to supporting these travelers. We as an industry have to move from a mindset of it's someone else's job or handling things on a case-by-case basis to a circle of support, embracing and caring for these travelers proactively. I want to share with you some comments related to where we can improve as a corporate travel society. One organization reported back to us that this topic is always a gray area. We address as one-off situations. There isn't a common standard. Another organization offered up that these travelers, they can book accessible rooms. And we're here to say that that's a minimal legal right, so we sure hope they can. In our last comment in this area, one travel manager, and perhaps area of moment of brightness here, one travel manager said, "I'm not aware of any travelers with special needs at this time, but this survey has opened my eyes to the issue, and now we're going to consider our next steps." And as your organization considers next steps, think about the traveler's experience. How do we make it easy? Not make a traveler jump through hoops. This means being proactive versus reactive. I want to share with you some actual examples today of what's occurring within organizations. And I'm going to ask that you listen for the complexity of these steps that the travelers have to take or how this experience may make them feel. We had one organization respond that arrangements are confirmed by, or as requested by the traveler. If the booking is out of policy, it will be sent to the internal travel team and then sent to the controller for approval. The controller confirms what he or she feels is necessary with HR before providing the approval. There's some steps there. Another organization responded that we would treat them no differently from other travelers and advise them that their travel needs violate company policy. I would provide statutory or regulatory references and seek guidance from human resources and legal. Ouch. We can do better than this. Now, our survey found that nearly 3/4 of organizations have a department or an individual who's dedicated to diversity and inclusion. But that discipline cannot tackle this alone. It takes a village. It's going to take a combination of HR, diversity and inclusion, travel, legal, just to name a handful to involve in this process. And some companies we found are doing this, and they're doing it well. Here's some great examples of defined processes where these organizations have reduced the traveler friction. One organization said we have a partnership with HR to address any physical, emotional, or other diagnosed conditions and/or permanent or temporary reduced mobility needs. Once HR reviews, our travel agency makes the necessary accommodations when booking travel. Another great example, this organization has a global staff workplace accommodations policy, and it guides employees with disabilities and their managers. The policy covers accommodations for travelers as well. So they've taken a holistic approach here. In our last example today, HR and the individual traveler work on specific needs. HR then communicates those needs to the travel department, and we set up accommodations as approved by human resources. Now, too often organizations are happy to tick the necessary boxes to cover themselves if something should go wrong for their travelers. They overlook the complexities and the increased level of risk for travelers with disabilities. And as an organization, there's an ethical responsibility, perhaps even a legal duty of care obligation, to ensure travelers with disabilities are treated with consideration, that they're treated with equality and they're treated with respect, that they too enjoy a successful business trip as any other traveler within the organization would and return home safely as well. We are really fortunate today to have a resident expert on our GLP team. Angela Paulus is the travel manager at Pitney Bowes. And Angela was faced with this very scenario within her company. And her experience today that she's going to share can help every travel manager on their journey to better support travelers with disabilities. Angela?
Thank you, George. Travel is a very personal commodity. We have responsibility to demonstrate compassion to action. We work to try to lessen travel conflict, increase satisfaction, and show empathy to the traveler throughout the process. Have you ever had a call in the evening or maybe a weekend from a traveler that experienced an obstacle? Yes, I know you, not alone. Though, have you ever stopped and thought of challenges a traveler can face in their journey if they have a visible or invisible disability? You have seen examples that Liz has shared in Brett's video on his journey. George has provided the facts. 1 out of 4 Americans live with a disability. Different examples: a medical condition, mobility, whether visible or invisible disability, a sudden injury, and now COVID-19. This last year, I had 3 travelers that self-identified as having a visible and or invisible disability. What an eye-opener working on this project. Did I, as a travel manager, have sufficient information to address the needs of the travelers? How was I going to connect the dots, review and streamline the process, and just not finger point as George mentioned? Let me tell you my story. I was asked how I can assist to accommodate a traveler with a visible disability and review what options were available within the process. Once I identified the process and the stakeholders that needed to be involved, human resources, risk management, medical, the traveler, a third party, and of course me, the travel buyer. It can be different in your company. The traveler contacted HR support line to open a claim, was assigned a case manager, then discussions went to her team to approve and make recommendations. Once approved, the traveler is notified. The traveler would send confirmation to the manager and a confirmed case number and an approval acceptance to the policy. Bear in mind, this was a short-term disability as he had injured his leg. He had to travel in the next few weeks and did not want to postpone. This would need to be a quick turnaround. What information was provided to me? The name of the employee, the case number, that the employee was approved for an exception to the policy, the date frame for the exception to this policy. Then I aligned with the travel management company. The travel management company added an attribute, an identifier in the traveler's profile. This enabled the traveler to book an out-of-policy reservation. The travel management company and the traveler worked together to review specific accommodations. They selected a business class seat for him, a short haul flight, any information and what was needed to make his journey more accessible. The expense team was also notified and added an identifier, exception to the policy, so the traveler's expense report can be processed and not delayed or rejected. For employees that might need to travel and have a medical condition, whether visible or invisible disability, Pitney Bowes has a defined process. I work to stay current and ahead of many travelers' needs, so I can be a leader in providing process guidance to the travel industry. What have I learned? Get familiar with your company's process. Be proactive instead of reactive. As a traveler manager, know what resources and exceptions can be made available to the traveler with disabilities. Get to know the process owner, the stakeholders, your travelers. Make sure you communicate. Throughout the journey, continue to be engaged, aware of the ongoing activity, ensuring that the process is working or if it needs to be enhanced. How would you do this? Well, the traveler works with the travel management company if there are changes or if they encountered any obstacles. Follow up with the traveler. See what the overall experience was, what needs improvement. You can host webinars, send out surveys. Our goal is to educate, communicate, enhance, and create a process awareness. Also to ensure a more proper, accommodated, and inclusive experience for travelers with disabilities. I encourage you to review the information and the resources that are available and the accessible toolkit self-assessment that our team outlines at the end of our presentation. I turn it over to Jeff, who can walk us how to connect the dots and some great takeaways from our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. During our research, one of the things that really brought this subject to life for the GLP group was a quote from Joan Eisenstadt with Eisenstadt Associates. She said, "When you have a disability, you're invisible. People ignore you and don't know how to treat you. We're just like you, human." What a powerful statement. That was a wake-up call for our group, and we hope this subject is a wake-up call for you. So what does this all mean? It means that we can do better as an industry. The corporate travel community has an opportunity to improve the human factor of the travel journey for individuals who self-identify or self-disclose as having a visible or invisible disability. These travelers have unique needs impacting their experience during every aspect of their journey, from pre-trip preparation through their return home. Our goal today is to build awareness of what accessible travel is, provide education on the tools and resources available to support you, and communicate the importance of this travel segment to create a more ethical, accommodating, and inclusive journey for your travelers. By now, you might be thinking, how do you start the conversation and begin connecting the dots within your organization? When you walk out the door today or leave this presentation, how are you going to make a difference and make the uncomfortable comfortable? To help you, we've organized this into 3 categories: now, next, and new. The now or immediate category is what you can do now when you go back to your company to begin affecting change. One of the resources the GLP group developed is a toolkit relevant to the business travel community. The goal was to provide a central repository to support and empower each of you to be an advocate within your organizations. Some of the content includes relevant websites, resources, and some really helpful recommendations on how to talk about disabilities. If you only have one takeaway from this presentation, we encourage you to take advantage of the self-assessment included in the toolkit. This will help you establish a baseline, identify the opportunity gaps, and understand what your firm is or isn't doing today. In addition, I'm happy to share that the self-assessment will be incorporated into a future update of the GBTA Managed Travel Index under a new category titled Accessible Travel. So keep an eye out for that enhancement. Also included in the toolkit is a GLP case study. Through our research, our group evaluated numerous companies to identify firms that were proactively incorporating accessibility into their business and the travel segment. After a review, the GLP group determined that Microsoft was a best-in-class example in this space. Although Microsoft is primarily known for its software products, it is also known for their inclusive practices. This includes assisting in onboarding, engaging, and empowering their employees, as well as providing tools and technologies to make the workplace accessible for individuals with disabilities. Be sure and take a few moments to review their approach to accessibility, as well as their accessible events guide, which contains some key principles when creating an inclusive event. The next or short-term category will be the development of your roadmap and how you will begin to build awareness, educate your employees, and communicate the importance of this topic throughout your enterprise. So, how do you do that? Once you've completed the self-assessment and reviewed the case study, the results will highlight the areas that require improvement and will become your roadmap for developing the strategies necessary to improve the travel journey for individuals with a visible or invisible disability. This roadmap should highlight the business units or disciplines where you need to connect the dots, just like Angela did at Pitney Bowes, and tapping the resources available to you both internally and externally. Your roadmap should also focus on strengthening partnerships with key disciplines and identifying current colleagues in your organization or in your professional networks that could provide perspective on how to be more accommodating and perhaps amplify the awareness. And finally, the new or long-term category will be structured around where you see accessible travel and affecting change within your organization on a long-term basis. So once you've begun to connect the dots and start removing traveler friction, where do you see your program in the next 5 years? Where do you want it to be? And how are you going to get there? Is there an internal champion that you could partner with to advance these efforts? These are some of the questions you'll need to address as you look to the future and outline a stretch goal you want to strive for as you begin to make the uncomfortable more comfortable within your organization. As you begin to look to the future, consider what policy changes you can incorporate over time to shift the mindset away from finger pointing and more towards educating and communicating to build awareness. And finally, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? As you begin to outline your goals and identify the roadblocks that are holding you back, think about the human factor and the positive impact these initiatives will have on not only your current culture, but also your bottom line. I'll turn it over for some additional details on our resources and how you can make a difference and do the right thing.
Thanks, Jeff. This is a big topic, but it doesn't have to be intimidating. We've assembled a comprehensive toolkit to support your own and your organization's efforts here. And our toolkit will be provided to everyone via email who's registered to attend this webinar today. And it's also located on the GBTA Hub for GBTA members to access. We really encourage you to spend time with the toolkit as soon as you can to keep the topic alive and fresh in your mind. An important first step to take is really to understand accessible travel definitions. And these are located in our toolkit. So you can become more comfortable with talking about disabilities, what language you should use, what's the right way to address this need within your travel program. And our session today is about making the uncomfortable comfortable. As we shared in the beginning, it starts with making this topic less scary. A key goal of our session today is to raise awareness. And the solutions we implement to better serve the traveling population will likely look different across any given company. But it's worth reiterating again, be sure to complete that self-assessment in our toolkit. It's going to help you identify gaps and areas to focus on. I always like to share with my team and remind them that you can't boil the ocean. But together as an industry, we can make progress by taking next steps and doing something, even if it's even small to start, to address accessible, inclusive travel within corporate travel management. Simply put, it's our moral obligation to stop looking the other way and start creating a circle of support around our fellow human beings, including those with visible and invisible disabilities. And it starts with each and every one of us here today becoming comfortable with this topic, so we can go out and have comfortable conversations within our organizations. And that's when we're going to expect the positive change begin to happen.
Thank you so much for joining today. This is a beginning. It's not often in life you have a chance to truly make a difference. When you walk away today, we're going to ask you to do two things. First, do one thing to make your travel program more inclusive. And hint, hint, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Second, share your experience. Help us create that awareness. There are so many crazy things going on in the world today that we just can't change. Inclusion and caring for people through life's journey is a place where we can have impact. Hey, sincere thanks to Brett for opening my eyes, and to my amazing GLP team. I got super lucky. To GBTA for giving us this platform and learning experience, And most importantly, thanks to all of you for taking this journey with us. One question for you. Hey, is it relevant yet? Let's turn things over to Mark Stratford for some Q&A.
Thanks, Liz. And we've had a number of questions come in through the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer those in the time that we've got remaining. If we don't get around to answering your questions, though, we'll follow up with you after today's recording. We've been asked a couple of times as to whether or not you were going to get a copy of the presentation, and if you're able to share that internally, maybe with your leadership or with your diversity and inclusion teams. And we would say absolutely yes. This will all be available, and we would love for you to share it internally within your own organization. Had a couple of other questions come in with regard to the traveler journey, and I think Brett would be the best person to answer this one. Just trying to find the question with regard to hotels. And Brett, what are the most common concerns or obstacles you endure in a hotel? How can we as hoteliers improve your experience?
Well, that is a wonderful question, and I appreciate that question being asked. I think the biggest challenge that I encounter in a hotel, and this goes for the people we arrange trips for, and this happened to me when I was in corporate America, whether I was booking the trip or my executive assistant or corporate travel, the biggest issue that we have is scarcity of resources. So I need what's called a room with a zero entry or roll-in shower. And as George said, in a 100-room hotel, I've got a 1 in 100 chance of getting that room. And so the biggest thing is just making sure that the hotel staff understands, what is a roll-in shower? Is it the same thing as a zero entry? I did a hotel training a couple years ago in Miami, and I didn't tell them who I was, the front desk, when I checked in. And two of the people at the front desk had a vigorous debate about which room had the roll-in shower, and it turns out they were both incorrect. So I thought to myself, well, that's a good thing I'm here. So just know that, make sure your staff knows the terminology, make sure they know the inventory, what rooms have roll-in showers, what rooms have tubs with grab bars, and then just make sure that inventory isn't given away. Oftentimes accessible inventory is kind of saved for the last moment. I can't tell you how many times I've booked an accessible room and my flight is delayed or late, and I arrive and my room's already been given away. So just guard that inventory, market that inventory, and just make sure your staff is well trained. And this is not an infomercial for Brett Approved, but we do offer some fantastic training if you'd like to talk about that offline. So I hope that answers your question.
Excellent, thanks, Brett. This next question is with regard to OBT, so I'm going to ask George to answer this one. And the question is, one of the main pain points is capturing ADA in a standard way. Is any work being done with Concur or any profile system in order to capture special accommodations?
I think that's an important next step that we as a travel community can raise awareness of this with technology providers that can support it. So as of today, there are attributes within Concur and a profile for a wheelchair, for example, or maybe a special meal on a flight if you have an allergy. But as our group went through this, we determined that a travel management company can build a profile attribute for you within Concur or profile system. And it doesn't have to disclose what the traveler's disability might be or what their need is. What it does is just allow that they fall into a policy group, so you can make the experience have a little less friction for them along the way, that they don't have to violate policy, or they don't have to jump through hoops for an exception, that you're making the path relatively easy. And that can simply be done with all the work done on the corporation side or your organization side, that third parties don't necessarily have to know what it is. They just have to know what's okay to do. And that can be done within Concur and online booking tools and profile systems today, while perhaps those systems in the future take advancement in this area.
Excellent, thanks, George. And there, on the privacy piece, there has been a couple of other questions come in. So there's a general theme on the privacy. And so maybe Angela, along with George, if you'd like to answer this next question. And it is, are there any privacy concerns with an employee who has a disability needing to disclose to so many departments? Or even, as you just mentioned, George, the third party such as the TMC?
I'll take this. So as I mentioned earlier, the traveler went to HR and he self-identified as having a invisible or visible disability. The only information that I would need and the travel management company would need was that it was an exception to the policy. And if there's anything that I can assist with to make the journey more accessible and the traveler would encounter any information needed, I would be there for them. But I do not ask any other questions. George?
And from a travel provider standpoint, we wouldn't need to know any specifics about the traveler. What we would need to know or want to know to support organizations are, do they fall within an approved policy group? For example, if you have a preferred hotel, however, one across the street is more accessible in its preference to that traveler, and you allow them to use that, we would want to have them in a policy group so they're not violating policy or being asked for an exception at that point. And at no point in the process do we need to know why that your organization has made that decision, but it does allow a more frictionless experience for that traveler's journey. And that's what we're talking about here today.
Excellent, thanks, George. And this one is probably going to come your way, George, as well. And this question is, verifications do exist for lots of areas. Are there anything available to help travelers identify the right or relevant itinerary to book for disabled people?
There are a lot of resources from airlines, from hotels. It goes back to the corporation and what is going to be allowed to book that right trip, and that's what we're advocating for. Is work with your travelers to understand their needs, understand what that means as it translates to booking an itinerary, so they can take the business class flight if that's deemed necessary. And sure, that's an expensive proposition, but in the other example, staying across the street at a hotel that maybe isn't your preferred location, but offers a better accessibility to a traveler, that's a small investment you can make. So when you talk about making the best itinerary, often the traveler themselves, based on they know their disability best, right? Brett is going to know what he needs best more than anyone else. So it's about having a process within the organization to understand that, and then have it work through all the different parts of the travel journey. So a traveler like Brett can have a fantastic experience versus having to be met with obstacles along the way in that ideal itinerary, if you will.
Yeah, George, I'll just jump in ever so quickly. I think the key, there's two keys in terms of what you just mentioned. One is flexibility. Your travel policies should be flexible so that, because I have friends in manual wheelchairs who, if the elevator's full, they'll pop a wheelie and go down 15 steps. If I did that, I'd probably end up in the hospital, right? So what's easy for me might not be easy for them, and vice versa. So that flexibility, I know specific hotel chains that work best for me. I know specific airlines that work best for me. So just be flexible and ask. And then the other thing I think, all too often, especially in our world today, that gets overlooked, and it may sound simple, but it's oftentimes difficult to practice in the heat of the moment, trying to get things done for work and everything else, is just be compassionate. Being compassionate, taking a minute, asking the extra questions, it's going to pay dividends in the long run.
Excellent. Thanks, Brett. And another question just did come in with regard to where you can find the information after the fact. And I'm very pleased to say that there'll be a follow-up email after this webinar that'll give you access to a recording of this webinar, as well as the toolkit as well. So you'll be able to find all the information will be coming through to your emails. And time check, we're just getting ready to close out. I've got one last question, And Angela, this would be related to you, I think, or at least maybe give people a starting point. And the question is, should travelers start with their HR department who handle the special needs within their company? Or where else would you recommend people start with?
So there's different areas within the company that you can start with. HR is usually the first step. That's where I started, but other companies have, you know, different sections within their HR policy, whether it's diversity and inclusion, whether it's the medical, whether it's legal, or it can be a third source that can assist in the process to be able to assist the traveler, that they can make an identifier within the travel management company, and also to alert the travel manager that they need an exception to the policy. But I would first start with your HR, but be mindful that different companies have different areas of expertise that can address as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Angela. And that absolutely, HR is a good starting point, but that might vary depending on what your organization structure is. But either way, I hope you'll be able to share the information today with regard to everything that we've been able to share it with your inclusion and diversities and your leadership teams as well. One final question that we do have that's came in, and it is, when you are researching your traveler population for issues that require assistance, how do you navigate privacy laws that may prevent you from learning about your travelers? Angela, I think you might have already touched upon this, that you really just didn't need any of the information. You just needed to know what the exception was. I don't know if you've got any other thoughts on that or whether or not that would cover that question.
I think that does cover the question. If there's any follow-up, I'd be more than happy to follow up with the person as well.
Okay, and anyone else? George, do you have any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, one of the important things we're talking about is creating a process for which travelers can self-identify. So you're not even asking necessarily asking them to publish this information, but making it comfortable for them so they know that whoever in your company, whether it's diversity and inclusion, whether it's HR, whoever it might be, that traveler has a place to go in a process in which they can talk about it. And within any organization, imagine there's going to be different confines as to you know, privacy of information and who needs to know it versus who acts on it without needing to know it. And that's what we would encourage is working within your organization. So these travelers have a place to go and they're not the ones asking, they're aware of it. So when they need it, they can go have that conversation and you have a process to assist them and support them throughout their journey.
Yeah, just real quick, if I could just add to that, just making people with disabilities, you know, seen and unseen feel comfortable. I mean, when you're in corporate America, you know, there's kind of a misnomer that large companies want to hire people with disabilities, and they really don't. So if you're lucky enough to earn that opportunity, it can be really scary being different. You know, in 2020, we're finally celebrating diversity and inclusion and what it is to be different and bring our whole selves to the workplace. But, you know, I've got 20 years of experience in corporate America, and it can be really challenging being different. And so just making people feel comfortable and giving them the avenues so that when the time comes, they can talk to whomever they need to talk to and say, hey, this is my situation. In order to close this deal, in order to be my best self and represent the company the best I can, this is what I need to be put in a position to be successful. So I just echo what George said and what Angela said. So.
Thanks, Brett. And with that, we're out of time for our Q&A section. Thank you to everybody for all of your questions. And please do remember to look at the self-assessment and please do one thing to make your travel program more inclusive. And if anyone has any additional questions after today, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the team. We'd love to point you in the right direction or help get you an answer. Also, thanks to all of my colleagues and panelists and industry experts on this extremely important topic. But most importantly, thank you to all of you for joining today's webinar and for your continued support of GBTA. Be sure to fill out the brief survey following the conclusion of today's webinar, which should be in your internet browser. And for information about more upcoming webinars and events, please go to gbta.org. Take care, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.